It took 30 years for me to admit the truth that destroyed my life. It was my pride that tore my family away from me. It wasn't fate. It wasn't the circumstances. It wasn't a lack of love. It was me. Only me. And today, at 55, sitting alone in the kitchen of my house in Lynchburg, I realize how that sentence has always been stuck in my throat, lodged there like a bone I refused to swallow. For decades, I repeated to myself that I did what I had to do, that at 25, I was only protecting my heart, that Mark didn't understand me, that my children were too young to remember, that all of that was just part of the past. But the past only becomes the past when we have the courage to face it. Until then, it stays alive, and it keeps looking back at us. That night in Gastonia never disappeared. I can still see Mark's tired face, trying to hug me after our fight. I see him telling me he loved me. I see myself answering with words that kill me today, just to remember. I see myself packing my bags while Emily and Daniel slept. I see myself slamming the door as if I were winning something. And back then, I really believed I was winning. It took 30 years for me to understand that when I walked out of that house, I didn't prove any kind of strength. I only revealed the size of my weakness. I rebuilt my life far from there. I changed cities, changed routines, changed my last name, but I could never change the feeling that something in me stayed frozen in 1995. I've always believed in God in a simple, almost timid way. I was never religious, but I always felt that something greater watching my choices, even the worst ones. And for 30 years, I did everything I could to ignore the same silent question. How long are you going to keep running? The answer came on an ordinary late afternoon. I was putting dishes away in the cabinet when my hands started to shake. Without warning, without drama, without any emotional preparation, I just said out loud, I need to go back to Gastonia. That's how it began. That's how, after 30 years, I decided to confront everything I had tried to bury. And I discovered that some truths never grow old. They just wait. Before you go, tell me this. What part of your past have you still not found the courage to face? And make sure to subscribe to the channel. I didn't know exactly what I was looking for when I sat on the couch that night. The TV was on, but I wasn't watching anything. The clock was nearing 11, and the whole house seemed to breathe a thick silence, the kind that makes you hear even your own thoughts trying to hide. The truth is, when I reached 55, I began to realize that so much inside me still felt 25. Time moves on, but some wounds stay frozen. Some part of me always knew this day would come, the day when there would be no more excuses, no more justifications, no more ways to push life forward without finally looking back. I spent years believing that distance solved everything, that changing cities, changing routines, changing people, even changing my accent, would be enough to erase who I had once been. But memory is stubborn. It comes back whenever it wants. Sometimes in the middle of the night, sometimes in the middle of an innocent conversation, sometimes when you're washing dishes and suddenly smell something you don't even remember the origin of. And on that couch, that night, something finally caught up to me. It wasn't a voice. It wasn't a clear memory. More like a weight, a pressure in my chest that came with a simple, devastating realization. I was tired of running. I lived in Lynchburg for so many years that I almost forgot what it was like to hear someone say my old name, the name I carried before I left everything behind. Linda Carter. I only used Carter on documents, rarely in conversations. In the new life I created, I preferred to be just Linda. A woman who had had a complicated marriage, as I said, and who preferred not to get into details. And people believed me, of course. No one imagines that someone could leave a husband and 2 small children out of pride. It sounds too extreme, too cruel, like something that only happens in the worst movies, not in the life of an ordinary woman like me. But it happened, and it happened to me. I was 20 when I married Mark, young, in love, and completely unprepared for life. He was gentle, attentive, the kind of man who looks you in the eyes when he listens, even when you're not making much sense. I was intense, impulsive, always certain of everything. Our children came early, Emily and Daniel, and suddenly I found myself living an adult life I had never learned how to live. My mother always said I was too proud to admit when I was wrong. I hated hearing that. Today, I know how right she was. Pride was always my greatest enemy, but I only learned that too late. The night of the separation wasn't planned. It didn't come from anything grand. It was just an ordinary argument that escalated too fast. Small things that turned into accusations, words that turned into blades, and finally, a silence so heavy it filled the whole house. When Mark tried to end the fight, I felt as if I were losing ground, losing the argument, losing something I couldn't explain. Instead of breathing, I attacked. Instead of listening, I yelled. Instead of stepping back, I pushed forward. And then I made the worst decision of my life. I walked out. I don't remember crying. I don't remember hesitating. I only remember packing my things in the dark and putting everything in the car while my children slept. I believed back then that I needed to protect myself, that I deserved to be understood, that Mark wasn't enough, that I was too strong to stay in a marriage where I felt contradicted. Now, at 55, I see everything clearly. Back then I called my impulse courage. Today I call it pride, blind pride. For 30 years, I treated the past as forbidden ground. Whenever a thought about Gastonia appeared, I ran. I developed an almost automatic ability to close inner doors before anyone could knock. I worked hard, lived alone, distracted myself with routines, with shopping, with TV shows, with anything that avoided silence. Because silence always took me back to 1995. But that night on the couch, something changed. I felt I couldn't keep avoiding it. Maybe it was God, maybe it was my conscience, maybe it was just the weight of 3 decades living like someone who left an unfinished life behind. I've never been religious, but I've always believed something greater watches over us. And that night, for the first time in a long while, it felt like that something greater was looking straight at me. I took a deep breath, closed my eyes, and whispered, "I need to go back." It was a small sentence, barely a thread of a voice. But I knew the journey that began that night wasn't about driving back to Gastonia. It was about finally opening the door I had kept locked for 30 years and accepting everything waiting behind it. I stood at my front door, still holding my keys, as if they had suddenly become too heavy. The Lynchburg sky was covered in a thick gray that matched perfectly what I felt inside. I had slept poorly, woken up worse, and spent half the night reliving memories I'd spent 30 years trying to bury. Now, with the morning unfolding slowly, it felt as if the world outside were calling me to a reckoning I had avoided all my life. Before leaving, I looked around my living room for a few minutes. The tidy table, the worn couch, the quiet walls. This was the life I built far from Gastonia. A life I had convinced myself was enough. A life I defended fiercely because admitting that it was built on top of a mistake would mean admitting I wasn't as strong as I had claimed to be. But as I stared at that overly organized space, something inside me ached. This wasn't a full life. It was just a life. Possible. I locked the door and inhaled deeply. When I got into the car, my hands trembled slightly. I didn't know if I was ready. But I also knew that if I didn't leave now, I might never leave. The road between Lynchburg and Gastonia had always been too long for me. Long in distance, long in meaning. It felt as though every mile held a decade, and every curve brought back a version of myself I didn't want to face. But I had to drive. I had to keep my eyes forward. For the first time, I had to let the past meet me where I was. The first few minutes were silent, Just the sound of the engine and one thought hammering inside my head. Are you really doing this? Yes, I was. And at the same time, I wasn't sure of anything at all. I had never told anyone the whole truth. My co-workers, the few friends I let close, they all knew an edited version of my story, a clean version, shallow, painless. My marriage didn't work. I was too young. He didn't understand me. Those lines became my shield. I repeated them so many times I almost believed them myself. But the moment I decided to go back, all those excuses collapsed at once. The truth is simple. I was the one who destroyed everything, and saying that out loud made my throat burn. As the road stretched ahead, I let my mind pull me backward. Back to the house we lived in. Back to the night of the fight. Back to the bedroom where Emily slept with her arm dangling out of the crib. Back to the hallway where Mark called softly, "Linda, please, don't do this." I never answered. I never looked back. I only wanted to win. And at that moment, being strong meant leaving. It's hard to explain the mind of a 25-year-old woman who thinks she's right. The world felt too small for my anger. I wanted more. I deserved more. I was better than that marriage I thought was suffocating me. I didn't have the maturity to understand that love isn't always light, that families go through dark seasons, that fights happen. I wanted intensity, passion, validation. And when I didn't find it, I ran. Now, at 55, everything is painfully clear. Back then, I called my impulse courage. Today, I call it pride, blind pride. Driving back to Gastonia felt like driving into an open wound. I didn't know if Mark would receive me, if my children would let me in, if any of them would even want to hear my voice. Maybe they were angry. Maybe they had moved on. Maybe they barely remembered me, or at least not the mother I once was. The truth is that a mother who leaves in the middle of the night leaves a mark no explanation can fix. The GPS told me I had 2 hours left. My heart sped up. With every passing mile, it felt like 20 years were rushing back at once. And for the first time during the entire drive, a thought escaped me, more like a timid prayer than anything else. If there's something greater out there, help me not fall apart. I wasn't asking for forgiveness. I was asking for courage. It was all I had left. The trees began, changing color as I approached the state line. The wind came through the windows, cold, thin, as if welcoming me back to a place that was no longer mine, but that I needed to face. And there, in front of the sign that read, "Welcome to Gastonia," I tried to breathe deeply, but some part of me knew. My breath wouldn't return to normal until I faced the first familiar face from my past. And that was the fear that had lived with me since 1995. When I drove into Gastonia after so many years, I felt something I didn't expect. Nothing looked the same, yet everything recognized me. The streets had new stores, new facades, new streams of people, but the feeling was the same as stepping into a room that once belonged to you. The body remembers before the mind does. Every block felt like it carried an old version of me, and that hurt more than any clear memory. I drove slowly, as if searching for courage on the sidewalks. A part of me hoped for a reason to give up, a traffic jam, a sudden storm, anything that would give me permission to turn around. But the city was calm, almost indifferent to my arrival, as if saying, "You're not that important anymore." And maybe that was true. Maybe no one here remembered me. Maybe I had been nothing more than a painful chapter in the lives of 3 good people. The first place I needed to see was the house, not to knock on the door, not yet. I just wanted to look from afar, feel the impact, understand whether I truly had the courage to walk through that gate someday. I parked on the parallel street, engine still running, hands gripping the wheel. For a few seconds, I stayed there, frozen. The house looked different. New paint, new windows, a fresh garden, but the bones of it, I knew them instantly. It was the same house where I learned to be a mother, and the same house where I decided to stop being one. My eyes stung before I could stop it. I saw a small swing hanging on the porch, something that didn't exist in our time, yet it hit me like an old photograph. I imagined Emily running in that yard, even though she never did after I left. The brain invents memories when the heart is desperate. I lowered my head, breathing slowly, trying not to let the pain spill out. I had never cried here after the separation, never had the courage. And now, 30 years later, tears came as if something inside me finally broke. In the right place. The front door opened. My heart shot up into my throat, so fast I almost felt sick. Instinctively, I lowered myself in the seat, like someone hiding from a past she should never have hidden from. But I needed to see. I lifted my eyes slowly, terrified of what I might find. A man stepped out to pick something up from the yard. Not Mark. He was younger, maybe in his 40s, tall, simple shirt, comfortable in that space. Maybe a new owner, maybe a relative. I didn't know. Part of me felt relief, and part of me felt an ache of disappointment. Did I want to see Mark? I wasn't sure. Did I want him to see me? Even less. When the man went back inside, my hands finally loosened their grip on the wheel. I had to leave. It wasn't time yet. As I drove away from the house, an uncomfortable truth surrounded me. I had no idea how to begin this journey. Asking for forgiveness isn't a formula. It's not just knocking on a door and saying, I was wrong. There are entire lives that were built after me. There are wounds that might have already healed, or maybe they were still open. And there was fear, the fear of being rejected, the fear of hearing what I never wanted to hear, the fear of discovering that no one needed me anymore, or worse, that no one wanted me back. I passed by a small cafe Mark and I used to go to when we were young. He always ordered black coffee, and I always got lemon tea. Remembering that now felt absurd, like I was intruding on the lives of two people who no longer existed. And maybe that was true. Mark and I at 20 were practically strangers to who we became. Without thinking, I parked the car and walked inside. The smell of bread, the low hum of conversations, the warm yellow lights, everything felt distant and familiar at the same time. I sat by the window, ordered the same tea, unable to choose anything else. While waiting, I took out the letter I had written the night before. The first letter to Emily, already wrinkled, already read 1,000 times. I didn't know if I would ever deliver it. I didn't know if I would ever send it, but I needed it with me. It was the only proof that I was trying. It began, Emily, if you're reading this, it means I finally found the courage I've avoided for 30 years. I folded the letter before my tears could stain it. When I looked up, my reflection appeared in the window. A tired woman in her mid-50s, shoulders slumped, carrying a quiet storm inside her. But I also saw something else, something small, almost invisible. Courage, small, but real. Maybe it was God. Maybe the weight of the years. Maybe just the fact that I had finally come back to the city where everything began. But I felt, for the first time, that I was on the right path. The thought was simple, but it made me breathe deeper. Maybe, just maybe, I was finally ready to look for my son. The problem was that I had no idea how Daniel would react to seeing the face of the mother who abandoned him 3 decades ago. I sat in my car for a few minutes, staring at the address I had written on a small piece of paper. The name Daniel Carter was at the top, in handwriting I barely recognized as my own. I had found the address slowly, cautiously, almost as if I had no right to look for it. I discovered he lived just minutes from downtown Gastonia, in a small neighborhood of new homes, neat rows of houses with well-kept lawns and young trees. As I drove through the blocks, my chest tightened. Each meter. I moved closer to him, felt like another drawer opening inside me. I remembered his blonde hair, so much like Mark's, his big eyes, his tiny feet tapping on the living room floor as he tried to chase his sister. And suddenly I realized it had been 30 years since I had heard his voice. Not the voice of the child I left behind, but his real voice. His adult voice. What would it sound like now? Deep? Warm? Would it sound like his father? My heart was beating far too fast. I almost parked and left. Almost. But something held me there. Maybe guilt, maybe courage, maybe that something greater that insists on pushing us toward the truths we've avoided. Maybe all of it. I parked across the street. His house was simple, beautiful, welcoming. Blue curtains in the windows, a small bicycle in the yard. And that bicycle, that was what nearly broke me. My son had a daughter. I swallowed hard, trying to keep myself from crying. 30 years of knowing nothing. And now here I was, looking at an entire life that grew without me. A life that might not have space for me at all. I thought about knocking on the door. I thought about running away. I thought about calling him. I thought about giving up. But I did what I always do when I'm terrified of what comes next. I froze, hands on the steering wheel, trying to find strength where there was none. Then the door opened. My heart stopped. Literally, I forgot to breathe. A man stepped outside. Tall, broad shoulders, short beard, simple shirt, fair skin like mine. And the eyes were Mark's. I knew instantly. It was him, my son. He looked at my car for a brief, casual second. No suspicion, no recognition. Just the distracted glance of someone heading out for a quick errand. He got into his own car and started the engine. It hummed softly, and he drove off without knowing his mother sat just 15 meters away. As soon as he turned the corner, I lost my breath. I didn't cry like in the movies. I didn't collapse over the steering wheel, didn't scream. I cried silently, like someone who doesn't want to wake the whole house. A quiet, heavy cry, the kind that drags its way through your throat like stones. And suddenly, I understood something I had never understood before. Daniel was no longer the boy I left sleeping in his crib. He was a man, a father, an adult who learned to live without me. And that realization, that one hurt more than any memory. It took a few minutes before I could breathe again. The letter for Emily was in my pocket, but the letter for Daniel, I hadn't written it. Maybe because I always knew he would be the hardest. Maybe because, deep down, I knew he carried the deepest wound. He was older than Emily. He would remember more, understand more, feel more. When I finally lifted my face, I noticed something strange. The front door of the house was still slightly open, and for a moment, I wondered if I should walk toward it, knock gently, introduce myself, ask to talk. But my legs didn't obey. My body wasn't ready. So, for the first time since arriving in Gastonia, I did something I hadn't done in years. I spoke to God, in my clumsy, insecure way. If there's a right moment, show me. I don't want to walk in uninvited, but I don't want to run anymore either. The words came out softly, barely more than a breath. I didn't feel an answer, no sign, no certainty, but something inside me felt slightly less heavy. I looked at the bicycle again, pink with star stickers, my granddaughter, and for the first time that entire day, I smiled. A small smile, still painful, still fragile, but real. A smile like love finding a crack to slip through, even in the middle of guilt. I turned on the car. It wasn't time yet, but I knew the moment was coming. It just needed to find me prepared. As I drove away, I looked at the street one last time through the mirror. 30 years later, I was finally close to my son. And for the first time, I didn't run. I spent the rest of the day driving around the city, as if walking through the corridors of my own memory. Every street seemed to carry an echo, a fragment of a life I abandoned too soon. I didn't want to return to the hotel, not with my mind spinning the way it was. So I drove without direction, watching streetlights, houses, parks, trying to understand how something so familiar could feel so distant. Eventually, I pulled into an empty parking lot near a small lake where Mark used to take the kids. It felt like the place I needed to be. Maybe because it still held the same quiet energy from decades ago. Maybe because some part of me needed to remember that I had once tried to get things right, even if only for a short time. The wind was cold, but gentle. I sat on a wooden bench and stared at the still surface of the water. The light stretched softly across it, almost melancholic. I breathed slowly, trying to make sense of everything I had lived since arriving. I had seen my son. I had seen the house. I had felt the weight of 30 years pressing down on me as if it all had happened yesterday. And now, there was one wound left, the deepest one, Mark. I didn't know where he lived now. Didn't know if he was still in Gastonia. Didn't know if he was healthy, happy, remarried. And honestly, I had no right to want to know. But the truth is, my heart beat faster every time his name entered my mind. Not out of romantic love, but out of respect, debt, guilt. I was still on that bench when I heard footsteps behind me. Reflexively, I turned. An older man walked his dog. He looked at me with a gentle curiosity and gave one of those kind smiles older people offer when they can tell someone is carrying heavy thoughts. "Peaceful place, isn't it?" he said. "It is. It always was," I answered, surprising myself with the honesty. "You're not from around here, are you?" "I used to be, but it's been a long time." He nodded like someone who understood more than he said. Maybe he did. Maybe he had lived something similar. When he walked away, I was alone again, and I finally did something I had avoided all day. I looked up Mark's name. I took my phone, hands trembling, and opened the browser, typed, "Mark Carter, Gastonia, NC." A few results appeared, some numbers, old addresses, public records, and then, shock, a recent address, updated just months ago, only 5 minutes away. My whole body tensed. I read the address again and again and again. It was real. He was still in the city, still living in the same geography that had once been mine too. For a long moment, I just stared at the screen. I felt a strange mixture of panic and necessity. I needed to see him. But the fear was paralyzing. What would he think when he saw me? Would he hate me? Look at me coldly? Ignore me? Blame me? Forgive me? I didn't have a single answer, and the not knowing hurt. I took a deep breath, searching for the courage that had brought me this far. Then something, I can't name it, pushed me to my feet. The walk to the car felt slow, heavy. When I sat behind the wheel, I leaned my forehead against it, eyes closed, breathing like someone trying to stay whole. "It's just a conversation," I whispered to myself. But it wasn't just that. It was an encounter with the past, with truth, with the version of me I had buried for half a lifetime. I turned on the engine. My hands trembled, uncontrollably. Every block I drove brought back memories. Mark holding Emily in his arms. Mark calling me Lynn. Mark laughing at my particular way of organizing things. Mark exhausted after work. Mark trying to hug me while I pushed him away. When I reached his street, my heart thudded so hard I felt lightheaded. The houses were simple, quiet, lined with trees. Each one had a small porch, a modest garden. Then I saw it. The right number. I pulled over in front of the house. My breath locked in my chest. I didn't know if I could get out of the car, so I just watched. The front door was slightly open. A pair of men's shoes lay on the welcome mat. The house felt alive, breathing, belonging to someone, belonging to him. I reached for the handle of the car door, but I couldn't open it. I needed one more minute, just one. A minute to remember why I was here, to remember I wasn't 25 anymore, to remember that running away again would be the same mistake all over. In the middle of all this turmoil, something settled inside me, a calm so subtle it felt like a whisper. Go. It's time. Maybe it was God. Maybe it was courage finally reaching the surface. Maybe it was simply my heart wanting to be free. The name didn't matter. What mattered was what I would do next. So I breathed deeply, wiped my eyes, and stepped out of the car. I knocked on the door before my courage had time to slip through my fingers. It wasn't a firm knock, nor a confident one. It was gentle, almost hesitant, as if I were asking permission to return to a place that had once been mine. And maybe for the first time in 30 years, I wasn't there to justify anything, or to defend myself, or to fix the past. I was there to listen, and to own everything, even the parts that still hurt too much. The door opened slowly, and there he was. Mark. His hair was almost completely gray, his posture slightly curved with age, but his eyes, those eyes I would recognize anywhere. The same, yet not the same. More tired, more mature, more grounded, but still his. And for a moment, I said nothing. My body froze. My heart thundered. My legs felt weak in a way that belonged to a much younger woman. It took him a second to understand who I was, a single second. But I saw the moment the recognition hit. His expression shifted. First, surprise, then a thick silence, then something I couldn't fully decipher. It wasn't anger. It wasn't hatred. It wasn't joy. It was the past. All of it. Standing there between us, in the doorway, and in my trembling chest. Linda. He said my name simply, without weight, like stating a fact. And that absence of bitterness, completely unraveled me. Hi, Mark. My voice cracked. I had planned nothing, no speech, no explanations. Nothing. May I come in? I asked, barely above a whisper. He hesitated for half a second, then stepped aside and opened the door. The living room was tidy. A faint smell of coffee lingered in the air. It looked like a house built with peace, with good silence, with steady routine. Everything I had shattered 30 years earlier. We stood for a few seconds, not knowing how to begin. He gestured for me to sit in the armchair. He took the sofa. My hands were sweating, and for a moment I felt like that 20-something girl again, the one who thought she knew everything about love when she knew nothing at all. I took a breath, trying not to shake. I'm not here to ask for anything, I began. Not immediate forgiveness, not understanding, nothing. I just needed to face what I did. He said nothing. Just listened. Still. Present. I continued. 30 years ago, I left because I thought I was winning, because I thought I was right, because I mistook pride for strength. I destroyed our family, and then spent 3 decades pretending it wasn't as serious as it was. My voice trembled. But it was. It was serious, and it still hurts. He inhaled deeply, moving his hands in that slow, thoughtful way he always had, as if choosing each word with care before letting it exist. Linda. His voice was calm, disarmingly calm. I was deeply hurt. For a long time. I won't lie about that. I nodded, a tear slipping down without permission. "But I also moved on," he said. "Not with resentment, just with life." A sharp ache spread across my chest. I didn't want him back. This wasn't about that. It was about owning who I had been and freeing who I had become. "I know I ruined everything," I whispered. "If I could go back." He lifted a hand gently, stopping me. "We can't go back, Linda. Not to then. Not to what we were. Not even to what the kids were." It hurt, but he was right. "Does Daniel hate me?" I asked, fighting a knot in my throat. Mark exhaled slowly. "Daniel doesn't hate you. He just doesn't understand. Children grow up trying to make sense of what hurts them. And when they become adults, they're left with what remains." I closed my eyes. Let the silence breathe between us. "And Emily?" "Emily always wanted to see you, but she was afraid she wouldn't be enough for you." That shattered something inside me. Something old, buried, but never dead. Mark looked at me with quiet seriousness. "You left, Linda, but you didn't disappear. They always knew you were somewhere out there. They just didn't know if you still remembered them." More tears, no longer held back. I didn't hide them. There was no reason to hide anything anymore. "I think about them every day," I confessed, "and that's why I'm here." Mark rested his hand thoughtfully on his chin. "They deserve to hear that. From you, not from me." "Will they listen to me?" I asked, barely voicing the question. "I don't know." It was sharp honesty, but fair. "But you came. That's more than I ever imagined would happen." I nodded, looked around that living room that might have once been ours, and for the first time in 30 years, something inside me shifted, a weight no longer sitting in the same place. "Thank you for letting me in," I murmured. Mark stood up, walked toward the door, and opened it. "Linda, forgiveness doesn't erase the past, but it can change what you do with it now. Maybe you still have something to build, not with me, but with them." I nodded again, stepped outside slowly. The air was cold, but it didn't hurt. When the door closed behind me, I felt something I hadn't felt since 1995. Peace. Not because everything was resolved, but because, finally, I had stopped running.